So you may start now.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair and honourable senators. It is my pleasure to appear here before you this morning as you continue your study into Bill C-45, legislation that will legalize the recreational use of marijuana in Canada. As you all know, I'm appearing this morning on behalf of the Canadian Police Association, Canada's largest law enforcement representative organization, with over 60,000 members serving in every police service across this country. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this legislation is of utmost concern to our members, as they will be on the front line handling the changes being made by this legislation. As is my habit, I'd prefer to leave as much time as possible for questions that you might have about how this bill will impact policing and how our members will adjust to this new regime for marijuana. But I do want to take this opportunity to make a couple of key points that I hope you will consider as you continue your deliberations. With respect to some of the specific provisions of this proposed legislation, my colleagues from the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police are here with us today and will touch on the operational difficulties of enforcement. But I do want to emphasize that there is no question that this will come at a cost to the bottom line of police budgets. Some aspects of this legislation will, quite simply, be almost impossible to effectively enforce, regardless of any additional funding provided by the government. Allowing individuals to cultivate and possess up to 4 marijuana plants is one specific example. I have difficulty imagining how any police service in the country will have the resources, whether financial or personnel, to monitor this particular provision. Certainly, resources will be focused on finding illicit large-scale grow operations, ones fueling the black market, but it will be almost impossible to stop individuals who choose to go above the 4-plant maximum in more reasonable circumstances. Whether the cost of this is borne by local police services, each province, or the local municipal government, there nevertheless will be a cost. Furthermore, the members I represent will be caught between those who choose to abuse the 4-plant maximum and other citizens in the neighbourhood that might be impacted by increased traffic or other activities associated to the cultivation and grey market sale of marijuana. On the one hand, those cultivating will criticize the police for meddling in their business, and on the other, some will accuse the police of not doing enough. Given the importance of community engagement and public confidence, this kind of scenario represents a significant concern. I only use this example to highlight specific challenges police officers will face in hopes that this committee will impress upon the government the need to ensure that additional funding provided to police services is distributed equitably between the RCMP, provincial police services, and the municipal services that will be, for the most part, on the front line of enforcement. There's absolutely no question that this government received a clear mandate during the last federal election to proceed with the changes put forward in Bill C-45. While the legalization of the recreational use of marijuana may not have been at the top of the list of priorities for frontline police personnel, I should note that, for the most part, enforcement of existing laws around the possession and use of personal amounts of marijuana by law enforcement has been rather passive for quite some time. An attitude that I would say reflects the general feelings society has towards the drug. While there may be some examples to the contrary, generally speaking, most officers who come into contact with people using small amounts of marijuana would take every measure possible to avoid strict enforcement of current laws. With the introduction of C-45, however, we've entered into a grey zone that continues to exist while this legislation is being debated by Parliament. Dispensaries and other, often illegal, vendors have flourished across this country. In Vancouver, my home police service, many storefront operations are getting a head start on breaking into the market without waiting for the legislation to pass or the accompanying regulations, both provincial and federal, to take effect. Unfortunately, this confusion has put police officers in a difficult position. Communities have reached out, asking our officers to enforce laws, as currently written, to shut down businesses, which has, in some cases, had the unforeseen impact of undermining public confidence of our officers, who are routinely asked, "Don't you have anything better to do?" This leads to a regrettable situation of damned if you do, damned if you don't, where criticism of police decisions is made by one side or the other based on action or inaction during this period of confusion. I'm hopeful that this committee will keep in mind that the ongoing delays passing this bill will contribute to this period of confusion. Police personnel have a duty to enforce laws, and while our officers are trained and certainly do regularly employ tremendous amounts of discretion, when it comes to the application of laws. I know our members will certainly appreciate clarity in one way or the other as soon as possible. Since the proponents of legalized marijuana are, in many cases, not particularly interested in respecting the timelines set out by the government, I recognize that Parliament has a difficult role in this regard. And my preference is, as always, to get it right rather than get it done quickly. However, I did want to take this opportunity to highlight the current circumstances faced by officers on the front line and emphasize the need for clarity, whatever any final version of this bill looks like. Whatever the rules are, they need to be clear and unambiguous in order to avoid confusion for the members I represent and for the public that will now be legally able to consume this product. So I'll just end my comments on that note, and as always, I'll look forward to any questions the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stamakakis. Le sénateur donc Boisvenu,
Senator Boisvenu, the Deputy Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Harel, your presentation was eloquent, but a little bit worrying because the literature shows us that it takes between 8 and 13 weeks to grow a marijuana plant, depending on how it's grown. So a person could have 3 or 4 crops a year. You could have 4 plants, and every few months you have more, and then you can have up to 16. So I don't know if one person can consume that much. When we have bills, they have constraints, but they have to allow police forces to control the products that are being used. For example, you talk about the number of plants in a dwelling and seizure, criminal organized crime's role in this. When it comes to recreational marijuana, there are other types of criminal activity that can be involved. So you would like to prohibit cultivation, perhaps? So there's a lot of concern in there. How will police forces manage this? For example, right now, people are supposed to drive at 100. They drive at 120. Police are going to have to be fairly tolerant because they won't be able to control all of this.
My first comments, but comme on le mentionnait dans d'autres.
As has already been stated in other consultations, Senator Boisvenu, what we want to see is a more gradual approach. And so our recommendation would be to not allow for in-home cultivation at the outset, to allow provinces to manage access to legal marijuana, and we shouldn't have to allow for in-home cultivation with all the complications that brings for youth. And we feel that there is a gap because there aren't any clauses that talk about what the maximum possession can be in a dwelling house. For example, somebody could have 30 kilos of dried marijuana. So there are some gaps there. You asked about what approach police services will take. We have to apply the laws, but we have to also set priorities depending on the seriousness of different kinds of crimes. So if somebody has a few extra plants in their dwelling, that won't necessarily be a priority or the priority for police forces. Secondly, as I mentioned, we have to figure out what we do with those plants. Under the bill, it says we have to return the plants. Are we going to have to look after them while the legal